org, a broadcasting outreach of Franklin.tv. You're listening to WFPR-LP, Franklin on 102.9 FM. You can listen online at WFPR.FM. We're so glad you could join us.
Hello, this is Frank Falvey with Music to Lift the Spirit. Happy Mother's Day, Jim. I'm kind of an old sentimentalist when it comes to Mother's Day. I go back to when I was a young whippersnapper in church and Sunday school, and I used to at times be an usher, and we would wear the white or red carnation, depending on whether our mother was alive or passed away.
Right.
So let's begin this program with old Bradley Kincaid song, My Mother's Beautiful Hands.
Oh, those beautiful, beautiful.
Taking a tour. Oh, the Aggie?
Yeah.
We were just talking about it.
I actually sent him an email, thank you email today,
Yeah.
and he responded with another invite to please come down.
I'll go down.
He invited us to the plant sale, he invited to the farmer's market, and so today Lily put up on Twitter to promote and social media all their events.
Did I copy you? No.
No, but he sent another email to me and I sent it to Mel saying like, you know, you're so kind and so, he just said everybody's so welcoming and warm. He doesn't get this in any other town.
Let's go. Let's go.
Wait till he comes for the second time.
Yeah.
I mean, triples the cost.
It being 7:03, a little late, call to order the today's May 11th and final for this run Finance Committee meeting. Do we have any public comments? Anybody on Zoom? Well, our record is intact. Since I've been on and since 2013, we've never had a public comment, which says something. I'm not sure what. You have something, Mr. Hallen?
Nope.
Don't you have slides and stuff?
I
Or is
do,
that
so
afterwards?
Yeah, I just want to get through, you know, all the departments, and then the item number 4 on the agenda. Oops, sorry, Chris. Your record's broken. Somebody raised their hand for public comment, George. I think maybe you incited.
Can you,
Her name's Jessica.
Jessica?
Hi,
Hi.
Jessica Guerra, 12 Eagle Drive. I really just wanted to break your record. Truthfully. I do have one question though, and I don't know if it's just redundant or what, but I still haven't wrapped my mind around with the proposed budgets that come through, and like there's a statement of department request versus town administrator recommends. The department request that I see doesn't match up with what is the ask of the department. So from an educational perspective, I'm just asking, where does that number come from, if not from the actual department's request? If you could clarify, that would be wonderful.
Mr. Hallen?
Through Mr. Chairman. So Jessica, I think if I have your question correct, you're looking at the larger budget book or what's on the screen, right? So
I can't actually see what's on the screen.
Oh, okay.
But,
so I understand the department request. So when it gets to this point in the process, the department request is essentially the same as the town administrator request. And why do we do that? Because we put out the department request model at the joint budget subcommittee meetings in early March every year. And ultimately, you know, it's one of those situations where, you know, we could load up. I mean, the departments will ask for, you know, millions of dollars more than anything we could possibly afford. The joint budget subcommittee meetings and group was created specifically to look at what the department requests were. And those folks are appointed from the school committee, the council, town council, and the finance committee. And so we go through that usually every early March. and they look at the department request. So I think I sent you an email before with the proposed budget that had I think $6 million deficit in March, and that's really where the department requests are. By the time it gets to this process, to be honest, it's just so much extra work. When you get to the budget book, this is essentially what we do to kind of streamline the process a little in terms of the town administrator budget. I hope that clarifies the question.
So essentially what it sounds like is it's almost like a non-column.
It's
thing,
almost
that
like a
it's always
non-column.
going to be what the town administrator's recommendation is regardless of
Correct.
what the original request was.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct. Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Anything else? And thank you. I'll send you a plaque in the mail.
All
Just your
gift
verbal
card.
recognition, that's all it takes, thanks.
Okay, first, Police Department, Department 210. If you could just give us a quick overview of what's happening, I'd appreciate it.
TJ Lynch, Police Chief, Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee. So I know you've read my budget narrative, and basically the only difference between, collective bargaining increases and inflation-related things, you will see on our expense side, we had some increases. There were some, basically historic items that we normally would get through the town's capital budget plan, that a number of people, including this committee, as well as the subcommittee of the council, had inquired about why they were in the capital budget if they were regular operating expenses. And they wanted a number of those items moved into our expense account. So that's where a majority of the increase with the tasers, the body armor, and the information technology program were all included in the expenses. The other increase of the budget would be the 4 additional police officers. We're trying to increase our patrol operations division from 30 to 34 patrol officers. And why are we requesting it? If you over the last 5 years, if you read the budget narratives that I've submitted, I've basically requested the same thing. I've highlighted 3 different phenomenon that have occurred. One is the increase in service demand that we've basically faced and continue to face each and every year. It just keeps going up. Number 2, to be blunt, we just haven't been properly staffed for the last 2 decades. In fiscal year in 2000, the department was budgeted for 54 police officers. We never got to 54. We only got to 50 due to knowing that budget constraints were coming. But we only got to 54 in fiscal year 22. So it took 22 years to basically get the department to where the town agreed it should be, and would have a sworn officer complement of 54 officers 22 years later. And I don't think anybody here would disagree with me that, we're not dealing with less call for service volume, less traffic, less population today than we were in the year 2000. So we simply can't, with the numbers that we have, we cannot provide our patrol operations division with a 2 over the minimum schedule. And what I mean by that is, let me go back. We also did a comparable community study, of 9 total communities between 30 and 36,000, and the average is 58.8. That's the average that a community of our size, would basically have, which would allow them to basically do a schedule that would provide what we need. For instance, town of Norwood, 10 square miles, 28,000 people, 62 police officers. All right, and the reason for that is nothing other than they're looking to do a schedule that allows for, 2 officers over the minimum. So I just want to explain a little bit. Is this on here, Jan?
What is the minimum?
I'm going to explain that right now. Thanks. Okay, so right now, the operations division of the police department. There are 3 different divisions: specialized services, which is detectives and the community service officers that serve as SROs at the schools. And then you have the administration division, which handles everything from scheduling, finances. That's made up of, 2 officers, a lieutenant and a patrol officer, and 2 civilian employees. The rest of the department, 7 supervisors, sergeants, and 30 patrol officers, I'm going to concentrate on the patrol officers, all work in the patrol operations division. They work on a 4-on, 4-off schedule. Again, there's 30 total patrol officers. They're divided into 2 groups, 15 in Group A, 15 in Group B, and they're spread across 5 shifts to maintain the minimum staffing. So this is our current schedule with 30 officers. The red line is basically the minimum. What is the minimum? The minimum is the actual threshold or the floor that we have to maintain the number of officers to be able to respond to call for service volume and to make sure that they're safe when they're out there working. You can't go below the floor. Okay, so whenever you end up going below the floor, you have to hire for overtime to make sure that you go back up to the minimum. If you can see here, 19 out of 24 hours, we only schedule 1 officer over the minimum. These spikes are because of our 4-on, 4-off, 10-hour shift, along with those schedules where we have overlaps where you will have a couple of hours where there's officers that are ending their shift and other officers are coming in. So, we've hired 30 officers in the last 6.5 years. Starting in July. I started in July of 2016. We've hired 30. So there is never a time where we're actually at full staff. We have been at full staff for a total of 4 weeks on 2 two-week different occasions in the last 6.5 years. All the other times we are down bodies, and that's either because of turnover or injuries, lengthy illnesses, whatever. So when you only have 1 scheduled over the minimum, and then you have a thing such as a 4-2 officer who, A, could be out because they're injured, or B, which happened recently, 2 young officers in their late 20s, early 30s walk into my office and say, "Chief, we're leaving our careers in law enforcement and we are going to the private sector. We're taking jobs in the private sector." So they give me 2 weeks' notice. Even if I have a qualified transfer in mind that's already told me they want to come to work for us, it's going to take 3 months before that officer is able to go through their pre-employment screenings, background check, medical, psychological, etc., come on the department, and then do their field training before they actually now go into that vacant 4-2 or whatever shift it was that that person left. If I hire somebody to put them in the academy, it's a solid year that that 4-2 shift will remain open. We have not had the luxury to send anybody in the academy because we just can't, fiscally or morale-wise, just can't do it. So when you have that 4-2 now open, that 6-hour block right there, for that 3 months that they're gone, 4 months, whatever, it's now at the minimum, which means now whenever the other officers that are on that schedule use their benefited time off, their vacation time, their holidays, their personal days, they get sick, and they call in, next slide. Now we're below the minimum. We have to hire. And this can be compounded by just having a number of people out at the same time, which on several occasions we were down 4 or 5 officers with them not in the schedule, and now we are down and we have to hire regularly. The department has basically met its capacity. Can you go to the next slide? Thanks. Oh, all right, so if we adding 4 additional officers, 4-2 at 6, this is what we're gonna do with the 4 additional officers we get them. We're gonna add 2 officers to the 4-2 shift, and 2 to a 6-4. Basically, 1 shift each on both squads, A and B. Next slide. Now we will be 2 over the minimum for 20 hours out of 24.
That's 7 days a week.
That's every day.
Every day.
Next. Again, you have an open shift because somebody leaves, somebody's injured, somebody's ill, somebody takes a day off. Again, same thing, 4-2, we're still 1 over the minimum. We now need at least 3 people to be out before we end up in an overtime situation. Next. And again, if you had 2 people out, basically you're still at the minimum and you're not in the overtime. And this is what it looks like at the comparison of 34 officers and 34. There's the minimums. And the blue would represent with 34 and the red with 30. You kind of get the the picture with the visuals and that. Okay. So why? The department right now has basically met its voluntary, basically the overtime that we offer, we're at voluntary capacity, meaning that we're offering more overtime than what officers are willing to take. Because what happens when we go below the minimum and we have to hire somebody to work? If we know about it in advance, we put it out to bid, which means the officers can bid it through our police officer scheduling system. If somebody calls in ill 8 hours before their shift, or no one takes a bid that has been out there, then we actually put it out through a paging system saying, hey, we have this shift, and if you want to volunteer for it, bid it. If nobody volunteers for it, they get ordered. No choice. They don't have a choice. We're a paramilitary organization. We are not a restaurant where you can close down a section of it because we don't have enough waiters or waitresses, etc. They basically get ordered to work. They either have to come in early and then work their 10, or they have to stay late and work after they've done their 10-hour shift, because we don't order people when they're not scheduled to work that day, meaning ordering people to come in. You've got the 30 officers that are eligible that are in the patrol division. You add the 10 other patrol officers that work in specialized services, you have 40 eligible officers that could potentially get ordered. In fiscal 21, we ordered 1,114 hours, or an average of 28 hours a year, and since the shifts are anywhere, because of the overlaps, only 4, 5, or 6 hours, they're getting ordered 5 to 6 times per year. In fiscal year 22, it was 1,560 hours, or almost a week. 40 hours of work, again, 7 to 10 shifts per year, because they're only getting ordered 4, 5, or 6 hours. Fiscal 23 to date, 1,480 hours. Our biggest, one of the biggest issues we have when it comes to the ordering and so forth, or with people taking time off, is at the end of the fiscal year. You cannot carry time over from year to year. You have to use it. So they have to use it by June 30th. A lot of people do hold on to their time in case something comes up. And so they end up using a lot of it during the last 2 months. So we're gonna probably exceed that 1,560 hours. It's just, it's a recipe for disaster. We just don't, you know, if we do not end up doing something about this, it's gonna continue to cause a problem, and it's gonna cause a problem with morale when you start to continue to order people. 20 years ago, and I've been with the Franklin Police Department for over 27 years, a patrol officer would get ordered a 4 to 8 hour shift once every few years. Because one of the phenomenons that we're dealing with is not only do we just don't have enough staff, we cannot field a schedule that provides for 2 over the minimum. It's also that there's a cultural change in the newest generation of police officers coming onto the force. They're just not interested in the premium pay that people get for overtime. They're just not interested in it. Either they don't need the money, or they want to spend time at home. I still haven't been able to fully get the full, like, why, but I'm telling you right now, they're just not interested in doing it. I'm not saying that's the reason that the 2 young officers decided to leave. It could be. I had exit interviews with both of them. They said they would never go to another police department, but they just weren't interested in continuing to do the work. Some of it to do with the ordering and all that, but they also can't work from home. And I don't know when the law enforcement profession will ever be able to work from home. It's just not gonna happen. So basically this is what it is. And if we don't do something about it, I'm afraid that we may end up starting to experience turnover, because people are looking to go to departments that actually do field departments with the proper staff necessary, that they don't have to have as much overtime, and that they won't end up having to order people to work as often.
Make one quick comment. We don't know why. I think there's a lot of changing reasons, and obviously law enforcement has been shifting. I just want to articulate one quick story I heard from one officer, which really hit home. You know, she basically said, look, you know, when you're raising a family and you're raising kids, and you get ordered in for a 4-hour shift, let's say even at an overtime rate of $80 or $85, you tally that up over 4 hours, it's about $320, right? You know, give or take $350. After taxes, etc., to get a sitter, it's not worth it. You don't really come in and do that shift and really make any money. After taxes, after you get child support, or you get a babysitter for your family on a Saturday, it's just not,
quite frankly, I agree with them. You know, it doesn't sound very appetizing to take a lot of shifts when you're really only going to end up pocketing $100 maybe, or $120 for that day. You've essentially given up your entire weekend for that, you know. And so I think TJ already mentioned, the chief already mentioned a few other things. I think all of you on the committee and everybody watching from home, I think we all are overextended. I think we all want more personal time. And I think I give a lot of credit to a lot of younger officers. They're saying, we're getting into this field, we love what we do, but I think what we're hearing is we're just trying to draw some new lines in the sand from the generations that worked a lot of overtime, right? The time and a half was there, whether it was the money, whatever the reasons are, we're seeing that shift. And so when TJ talks about the morale, this was one of the biggest issues, you know, we heard of during collective bargaining, and I know for a fact we're going to continue to hear from it. While we can't cite the officers that left, that was the unilateral reason, pay, for example, and compensation and other issues is obviously one of the big ones. And to raise a family in a field like this is very, very challenging. Additionally, you know, when you come to the Franklin Department, you're giving up your 4th of July. Every officer to do the 4th of July festival, that is an ordered thing for every single police officer. So in New England, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, that's the prime week or two of the year. School's out, everyone goes away, Cape, whatever, Maine, Cape, doesn't matter where you go. But every single officer has to be in Franklin for the 4th of July festival. You get hired, you know that, but I think those additional elements continue to just kind of, you know, chip away a little bit of the morale. And so investing in this system, at least now, is huge. And for the entire community to understand, and I know, George, you bring it up every year as a cited example in the fire department, et cetera, you know, in terms of shifting the pieces here, we have to recognize the gentleman next to me. We just literally cannot suck any more blood out of a rock. He even told me after the 4x4, there's nothing more I can do. There's no more rabbits in a hat. I have no more magic wands. And yet still, a year or two later, with SRO agreements and Tri-County and other things, he still then pulled another rabbit out of a hat. There's just no more magic tricks. At the end of the day, the community, with the call volume that's here, we just saw some new numbers from the MEC the other day, and I know the fire chief is going to speak to this too. The calls for service are just record-breaking every year, and I don't foresee, and I think the chief will speak to this too, we don't see any situation in which fire or police is going to have a downgrade in calls anytime soon. And, you know, at some point, if you're in my seat, you know, you can't keep working with these folks and then say we just can't keep doing nothing. You just have to, at some point, do something. And in the fire chief's case, and in the police chief's case, they're finding other ways through, obviously, ambulance receipts, you know, are up, and so that justifies some additional paramedics. In this case, reducing the forced overtime, you know, will hopefully in FY25 and beyond still save money in the overtime budget, so it's not like just a big investment with no additional savings. I think I put that in the slides and in the narrative. But from a morale perspective, and TJ can speak to this as well, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago when we offered a test, you'd get 200, 250 people applying to be a police officer. Today we're getting 40. And we don't really have a lot of extra room here. The bench is obviously less than it's ever been for dynamics that are probably far from out of our control. And so at some point the town, and this is, in my opinion, obviously the right year, which is why we've added in the officers, you know, we just have to make this investment as a community. So I hope, you know, I just want to say those two things really quickly.
I mean, the thing is I just wanted to say that this isn't just about ordering. It's not just about overtime. It's talking about fielding a schedule that's appropriate for a number of different things. And these are some of the things like the add-ons that would also do. You know, it's going to bring us in line with the standards, you know, that currently are used in law enforcement of 2 or more over the necessary minimum. You know, again, it realizes the cultural change, you know, about overtime. Maybe they're right, who knows? I didn't like working 72 hours a week for like 7 years, but I put my wife through grad school, got the house on Shady Lane that I bought and so forth. Maybe they don't want to know, I don't know, my parents didn't give me their inheritance while they were alive. I don't know where they get the money from, but God love them. It's going to account for current and anticipated increases in the call for service volume that we kept talking about it. The safety of the officers would be enhanced with more officers assigned on the shifts. It's going to allow for increased traffic enforcement. As I showed you, when we're at the minimum, there's no directed patrols to put out to go to the plethora of requests that we receive to actually do traffic enforcement. It's one thing to put the radar board out that says your speed is this. It's another thing to have an officer there that's pulling you over, okay? And the only way that we gain, it's voluntary compliance. We will never be able to pull everybody over that speeds or violates the traffic laws. It's voluntary compliance. They see the blue lights, maybe they're like, yeah, I don't want to be the next one they pull over. We want to be out there. We've increased it a lot, but we can only do so much. There's nothing like being told to go do radar at a particular location, set up, you're ready to rock, and then all of a sudden you get a call, you got to go on a call for service. You show back up, you're there for 2 minutes, you're just about to pull somebody over, you get called to go on another call for service. That's what's currently happening right now, and we're not going to be able to provide, the traffic enforcement that people are asking. The department's going to be in a much better position to deal with known and unanticipated events causing personnel reductions. We're going to have more retirements in 24. I already know about them. We're going to have some in 25. We're going to have the unknowns like the 2 young officers that left. People are going to get sick, and unfortunately may be injured. It's going to allow the department additional options not currently available when we talk about hiring. As I said before, I can't predict who's going to apply to us to transfer. If we're looking for women or minorities or something like that to kind of diversify the department, I can't predict that. Now the list, I have a little bit more leeway to look and say, okay, we'll interview the 10 female candidates that passed our test and so forth. But I can't use the list because I can't afford to send somebody to the academy. I can't do that because I don't have the personnel numbers to be able to do that. Again, it's going to help us maintain our high standards and the hard work we did to obtain police accreditation. And with 34 officers assigned to the operations division, as Jamie said, I can't tell you what the reduction will be because we've never been there. The department has never properly fielded an operations division with 2 over the minimum. Do I predict that we will be able to save money? Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. If you're going to have 2 over instead of the second person out, it's now the third person out. Those numbers should end up dropping, and we should be able to, I think we predicted it's probably over $100,000. Could be more that would be able to. So if we're asking for $331 for their salaries, $100,000 could come back in savings in fiscal year 25. And of course, I got to throw Ben out there when I'm asking for money. So
Where's the new one?
I know, it's,
he didn't make it in that picture, but
Questions?
I have a couple of them. Who sets the minimum?
we
Who
do.
actually establishes it?
It's the administration. We kind of we look at trends and so forth. I'm not going to lie to you. The minimum hasn't really gone up in same thing, 20 years.
And then, how does details impact this? When you need people to go out in details, does that impact how many people you have to go into normal shifts?
No, details is completely voluntary.
This has to be voluntary? Okay.
No. The only time we'd ever order for a detail is if it was like an emergency situation. It'd have to be a significant emergency. We'd call it out first, and then it goes to the full-time officers, our specials that are still post-certified, that, recently retired to keep up with their training. And then, of course, we have, traffic constables. Basically we've gone to, mostly it's the fire department.
Gotcha.
Individuals, because we just can't fill them all, because just like they're not looking to do overtime, they're certainly not looking to stand out and do traffic as well,
Yeah. And then my last question was, and you've kind of addressed this, but you have 4 on. How long do you anticipate, what's the challenge in getting those hired? It seems like that's harder and harder, so how are you going to get those 4 on board?
We've already posted it, hoping that we get the money, and if we don't, then we basically, we wouldn't interview, but hoping to get, again, transfers. Hoping to see, we do have some people that sent in unsolicited, we're looking, to come to your department, so we do have that. The last time that we put something out, we got 19 applications, but unfortunately, we only interviewed, I want to believe, out of the 19, we interviewed 9. We were only fond of 4. And unfortunately, again, now you start doing background checks, and one didn't work out. We're working on the second one right now, because I'm not going to settle. that is one thing I'm gonna tell you right now, is that this department is not gonna settle and reach down deep and then make a decision to hire somebody that we don't feel meets the standards of what it is to be a Franklin police officer. It's not gonna happen while I'm here.
That's great. That's it on mine.
Anybody else? One quick.
Is there a reason you have a use it or lose it policy for the vacation?
It'd be tough to budget to, to have everybody turn. We do allow them to turn in 20 hours, they can basically transfer over. So it's it's a little bit, but if you let everybody do a week, then it would be, by the time they'd have to tell us that they were gonna do that, if the budget was already submitted, I'd have no way of saying, I'd be like, geez, that's a lot of, extra time. When they use their time,
Right.
it could potentially end up causing an overtime situation. There's not an exact science when it comes to overtime.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, we take the total amount of all of the time the operations division has for personal days, holidays, et cetera, and then basically hour for hour at an overtime rate, and then we slash it by 60%, and it's worked for the last 30 years. Kevin Ryan was here, that's how they used to be 60%, now we're down to 40%. But that's typically how we do it, but we do allow them to carry up to, 20 hours over, or 2 shifts for the operations division.
I was just wondering, and you kind of touched on this, but just in terms of, it almost seems like with overtime, well, 2 areas. It's overtime pay and kind of the cost to hire new people and the expense associated with that anyways. It almost seems like this would pay for itself. And that's where I'm trying to understand. I don't know if you're able to kind of say, well, these are the number of overtime hours, that we're filling right now, and you're paying time and a half or whatever. And so, you have an officer or 2, and it could even almost pay for itself.
I mean, I think we'll definitely, if there comes a, this will definitely decrease the overtime, and you could probably eliminate the overtime, but it would be at a cost above and beyond what the overtime budget is.
Yep.
Like when I originally went in, told Jamie and Jeff, we're going to the MEC, we're gonna lose the dispatchers, we're not gonna have somebody up front. I don't want a dark station. I don't want it where people come up and have to ring a bell and there's nobody to greet you and so forth. And there's a number of auxiliary things that dispatchers do that don't involve answering the phone or using the radio. I said, I got a plan for that, but it's gonna cost this. And then we need 7, 8 additional officers. And they basically said, you're out of your mind. It's not gonna happen. I said, okay, I got plan B. And that's how the 4 on, 4 off, 10-hour shift schedule came to be. And the only reason that lasted was that worked because and we got 5 officers out of that. When we switched from a 4 and 2 8-hour shift to a 4 on, 4 off 10, it's because they owe us 100 hours of time. Because there's 100 hours, actually 120 hours less when you work a 4 and 2 8 than a 4 and 4 10. They negotiated 20 hours out, but they owe us 100. All of the training that we used to budget for and pay for used to be on overtime. Now it is on their straight time. They do it while they're not scheduled to work, and it doesn't cost us anything. And we took all that money and hired 5 people.
And they love the training and professional development.
They love the training and development, and they love the 4 on, 4 off. So again, with all this wellness initiatives that we're doing, the 4 on and 4 off, that was a part. I mean, that wasn't the primary reason we did it, but it definitely provided a wellness thing, having that extra time, 4 days on and now you're 4. It's a compressed schedule, and you've got these 4 days off. And then we're ruining it by having to order people to work all the time.
Right. So if you think about the 4 on, 4 off, you take your week vacation, you now have 12 days. So, that's pretty good. And that makes Franklin Police also very attractive to a lot of other candidates, especially younger officers, where the culture has changed, where people want to come here because of that. I don't know the closest other department that has that schedule. It's pretty far, though.
North Andover, a couple down the Cape.
So
I will say that I'm getting inundated
Right.
with requests about our 4 on and 4 off, and then there's others through the Mass Chiefs that put out, hey, I'm looking to go to a 12-hour. Because New England is the last basin of 8-hour shifts when it comes to law enforcement in the United States. Everybody I went to the National Academy with in 2017 was working either 10-hour shifts, and a majority were working 12-hour shifts.
So regionally, when you're attracting candidates, it's an attractive place to be just on those issues alone.
Anybody? I have one. there's a rainbow out there and there's a pot of gold at the end of it. What would be, well, considering potential future things around here, what would be your ideal number of people without, you know, we don't need 14 guys in a shift certainly, but some number, what is the magic number that virtually eliminates overtime, let's say, or reduces it out of sight? What's that number? Do you know?
I won't give you the pot of gold answer. I'll give you the possibly realistic answer. No.
I'll buy that.
If we had 2 more officers to add to the 34, if we were to get these and make it 36, see that shift right there? That's not a misprint. That officer comes in at 1 o'clock in the morning and works till 11 o'clock in the morning. And there's no way for me to get rid of that right now. Try, even with 34, to get rid of it. I would not end up with a 2 over the minimum for 20 hours. I would only end up with a 2 over the minimum for like 12. If I had 2 more officers, I'd be able to add to the 9 to 7 and the, you know, in the 4 to 2, and we would be able to actually get rid of that, taking those 4 officers, 2 officers assigned to each group plus the other 2, and we'd be able to get rid of that shift. I hate that shift, but I have no choice right now. I have no choice. So there's 2, and I'd also like to get at least 2 officers to be able to use towards just traffic enforcement. That's all they would do. Maybe even more.
So you're saying 2. Bottom line, 4?
4. Realistic.
It's just the
I'll take 10. I got plenty to do for them, but I just know it ain't gonna happen. So I'll take 4 would be really good. 2 to be able to get rid of that 1 to 11, adding to patrol, and then 2 officers that I'd be able to basically assign to just doing traffic enforcement.
those numbers too, he needs a station.
Mhm.
If those numbers as well, he needs a station. At some point, you know, it's, you know, and I'm sure once the building committee gets starts, there'll be tours and all that stuff. You'll see everybody, every closet, Laura, you know, all the sergeants, they're all stuck in closets. So at some point, I'm just also acknowledging and making the pitch. You know, if we want to get to those numbers, there's really not much more room. And as the chief said, there's no remote work really available. So at some point, the station has to become a reality.
Yeah, I mean, right now, we don't have, it's not just it's office space, but locker room space. I mean, we're running out of locker room space in the male locker room, and in the female locker room, I only have 2 more spots. And the lockers are this big, high school lockers. You know, they're not built for what the demands of the uniforms that they have today. Everything is rechargeable. I'm surprised we haven't burned the station down, sorry, chief.
Okay, I'm set.
Yeah.
Everybody?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, appreciate it.
A lot of brass tonight, Chief.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the Finance Committee. Jim McLaughlin, Chief of Department. The proposed budget for FY24 for the Fire Department is a $595,000 increase. 55% of that $595,000 is related to collective bargaining items, the majority of that being the COLAs. The other 45% of that number is basically 2 separate items. The first item is on the expense side of the ledger. We've added turnout gear for $75,000. Similar to the police department, there was conversations during the capital round where prior to this year, we've always put turnout gear in the capital round of budgeting. It is a recurrent expense, and the decision, it was brought down to me from the TA and the finance department to incorporate that into as a line item into FY24's budget. So that's where you see an extra $75,000 on the expense side. On the personnel side, we are asking for 2 positions. One being a EMS captain that would report directly to the EMS battalion chief at headquarters during business hours. That would assist with internal training, also external training. We've been doing a lot now with the senior center. We've been doing a lot with the other town municipal employees, school department with the school nurses. We can act more interaction with the public health director, and keep on top of trends that are going to be changing in the EMS industry in the future to come. In addition to that role, during those hours during the week, that position will also be readily available to go on to the spare ambulance that's at headquarters, A3, that is fully stocked. That truck has everything except personnel. Currently, our ambulance that's stationed at headquarters cross-mans the tower truck. That person would be also available to take that tower truck if it was a fire call and when it was out on the road. Who would that person be with? It would be with the other firefighter that we got proposed in this budget. That firefighter would work the same identical schedule as that captain during the day at headquarters. This is certainly outside the box. This is not conventional, but we're not afraid to go outside the box if we think we're going to give a better level of service within the best financial way that we can. Would we like to have a third ambulance? I think right now we're in that transition phase between a second ambulance and a third ambulance. Our numbers are going up. Calendar year 22 is the first time the department's gone over 5,000 runs. We did 5,120. Our mutual aid calls coming in are at an all-time high as well, 250. In my budget narrative, we listed the peak times of these runs, of when we're calling for mutual aid, all runs in general. And the majority of the calls are Monday through Friday, and between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. I'm not a big proponent of peak time personally. Things happen, Jim, and I know you listen to us all the time. Bad instances happen after business hours during the week. There's a lot of simultaneous calls there as well. But we think this is the first step in that we can address bringing down mutual aid in the most cost-effective manner. So that firefighter would work not like normal firefighter would come on the Franklin Fire Department. They'd be assigned to one of the 4 groups and work a 24-hour shift like everyone else. This firefighter would work 7 to 5:30 on the same 4 days that EMS captain's working the 4 days. Now we have that extra bench, if you will, during those hours, that if we have 2 ambulances out at the same time and we do get another medical call, we can roll that truck. And we're very fortunate to be in the situation to do that. I'm sure there's a lot of fire departments that would like to do it, but they don't have good reserve apparatus like we do to do that. We keep up with our apparatus. We have that support of getting good apparatus readily replaced. That allows us the opportunity with the reserve truck of manning that truck and performing that duty. We think it's going to bring down the mutual aid calls. And we talk about the ambulance, but it's also going to give us the option of putting that ladder on the road as well. If we need be, if that ambulance, say one is at Milford Hospital or simply on another run, we don't have to rely on a mutual aid ladder truck. So we think it's a good step in the right direction. Again, it's outside the box. It's not conventional, but we think it's the right thing to do. I mean, if we wanted a third ambulance, we'd be asking for 8 people right now. We know that's not realistic, so this is what we think is the best way of doing that. So that's where we are with the personnel. Like we said, the run count is going up. Our ambulance transports is going up as well. For this current FY23, we expect about $2.2 million to come in from that. Just last year's fiscal year was 1.875. So we've had a significant, we got about 300 to 350,000 increase in revenue. And when you talk about this extra ambulance, we know the revenue is a big thing. It's a great thing for the town. But ultimately, it's about the services that someone needs. If someone has a stroke, heart attack, it's so important to get that person to that facility that much quicker. In addition to that, even though those engine companies are the same trained medics as the ones that are on the ambulance, but the ambulance has all the medications. The engine companies only have very limited things, Narcan, an EpiPen, an aspirin. The ambulance has all those medications that we like to give person in a very quick manner at the wherever the incident takes place, so we can both administer that medication and get them on the way to a hospital at the same time. We think it's a win-win, both in that regard for the ambulance and for the coverage with the ladder. So that's what our proposal is for the 2 firefighters. So between those 2 items and CBA commitments, that is the reasoning for the $595,000 increase from last year's fiscal year.
Can you remind me, do we get a chargeback when we call mutual aid? Do we get a fee for that if we, how does that work?
So if a mutual aid outside of the town
Yeah.
company comes here and transports a patient, that town gets that ambulance cost. They get that money. The vehicle,
pay
the
it,
town that transported that person.
Oh, we don't?
The Bellingham comes in, Bellingham bills
yeah.
the patient.
They bill the
Oh,
patient.
they
yeah.
bill the patient,
So
okay. So we wouldn't have to
conversely, if
pick
we
up-
go to another town, they would be able to do that as well.
Yep, so
But
we
more
won't-
times than not, we're needing help coming in and us going out.
So we
with
won't, if the mutual aid calls drop, it's
Yes.
not like we're gonna get we're not, there's no expenses that we're incurring that will go down, yeah.
No, it should go up as far as the ambulance
Yep.
revenue, for sure, because it's less times we have to rely on the outside departments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Everything?
Good.
George.
Yep, sorry.
So the new firefighter would be a paramedic slash,
You have to be a paramedic to
Have to be a
apply here,
paramedic,
to
yeah.
even apply. You have to be a paramedic.
how many members of the department are paramedics right now?
We've only got 2 firefighters on the payroll right now, left that are EMTs. Once they retire, which both of them will probably be retired within 12 to 18 months, the whole department, I'm not a medic as well. I gotta count myself too. I couldn't even apply here. But we have 2 active firefighters that are not paramedics. Everybody else is.
Thanks.
I got in trouble for thinking outside the box last night, so I'm glad somebody.
You got
thinks-
company now.
Yeah, well, I'll ask the same question. There's that rainbow out there?
Yeah.
And the pot of gold at the end?
Yep.
What would be the ideal staffing where you would sleep at night?
Yeah, in the perfect world, the ideal staffing for 2 fire stations that we have would be, on each group would be a minimum of 13 firefighters and 3 extra personnel to cover, as the Chief Lynch alluded to. In our department, only 3 firefighters in each shift can take either vacation or holiday time. We limit it at 3. So if you have 3 extra firefighters on that shift to cover those 3 vacancies, that's really gonna decrease overtime costs and the potential for someone being ordered. That's the perfect world. How do I come up with that number of 13? Station 2, you'd have your 3 on the engine, 2 on the ambulance for your 5. And at headquarters, you'd have your battalion chief, but you'd have your engine company with 3. You'd have your ambulance with 2. And I would really like to have those other 2 on all 4 shifts to cross-man the 3rd ambulance in that tower 24/7. That's 69 firefighters. That's why we're here presenting 2 to you tonight, to do the right thing. Could you get away with 65? Yeah, you probably could, because right now on our shifts, we have 11 as our minimum manning. 11 as our minimum manning, 3 of them being officers. We have 13 assigned to each group. So that means 2 of those 3 that are out on vacation or holiday, we should be able to cover with straight time. And for that 3rd, we'll cover with time and a half. So that's keeping overtime very manageable for us to have that 2 extra on every shift. If you don't have any extras on every shift, throughout my whole career, I've heard finance directors or town administrators go back and forth, what's cheaper? Overtime or extra personnel with, you gotta train them, equip them, legacy costs. That's an argument for them, but I'll go back to what Chief Lynch said. It comes down to ordering, and that's a huge morale killer. And I can tell you, we've taken a lot of transfers from other departments in the last couple of years, and one of the reasons we're here, besides great equipment, we're training, things are great to work here. Where I'm coming from, I had to get ordered a lot, and it's getting to be a bigger problem. I had a meeting with my colleagues just yesterday, and a lot of departments are running into the same situation that Chief Lynch talked about. This newer generation, if they're being told they can't go home for another 14 or 24 hours, it's not for me. And they're looking at these departments who have the correct manning on these shifts to cover them, knowing, when I come to this department, I'm going to be able, when I go home at 7 in the morning, I'm going to be with my family. And I'm not, you can still get ordered. It's not a perfect world. In the nature of our business, you're going to get ordered. That comes with the territory. But once it becomes excessive, it's not going to be a place that people are going to strive to work in. And I can't agree with the chief more. We need to keep that little extra on those groups to take the edge off the overtime of the potential ordering.
How many mutual aid going the other way?
I think it was calendar year 22, I believe it was about 180, 175, 180.
So, and its incoming is?
250, 250.
250. Wow.
And 60, just for reference, 69% of our calls, total calls are EMS-related calls. And of all of our calls, the 5,120 in calendar year 22, just over 50% were transports, where we, half those runs, we went to someone's house and took them to a hospital. Just over 50%.
Okay. Anybody? And thank you for the ride a month ago.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
Wants a scorpion bowl next time.
Next up, regional dispatch.
Good evening. My name is Gary Primo. I'm the Executive Director of the Metacomet Emergency Communications Center. For those who might not know, we dispatch police, fire, and EMS for 6 towns, Franklin being one of them. So the State 911 Department has been very generous with Metacomet in helping us with our assessments. As you see, 21 and 22, Mr. Helen had put in placeholders as the grant covered 100% of those assessments. You'll see a stark increase going over 23 to 24, where they're covering 50% for 23 and only 25% for 24, sorry. So come fiscal 25, the town will be 100% liable for the assessments. There's still support incentive grants that we apply for that give us about $1.5 million to reduce the cost overall. We have about a $200,000 increase of our total budget from last year to this year. That includes adding 1 additional administrative staff. We haven't hired anybody administrative-wise since we went live 4 years ago last week. Happy anniversary, Metacomet. And we're have the same staffing issues as police and fire. We have a lot of forces. Luckily, we're at the very edge of a very difficult time with staffing, and we are almost at full staff. We are approved for 30 FTEs, and we have 24. 6 are in training, and 1 is in the State 911 run Public Safety Communications Academy. So we're plugging along. Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, happy anniversary, Gary, and just really quickly, congratulations to Gary. We just, the board, one of those things that people don't think that I might do in my spare time is I'm the chair of the Regional Dispatch Board. And it's been a learning curve for 4 years. Fortunately, my dad was a state dispatcher for 36 years at the state police, so I got a little bit of info, but it's been a big challenge to get everything smoothed out over there. Gary and Daryl and the staff have done a great job. I think what we see with staffing, the board tried to address the other day, we're giving a 1-year, one-time bonus, retention bonus, a 3-year retention bonus, and a 5-year. Just like police and fire, all public safety, the more muscle memory you have, the more consistency, sustainability you have, the better the dispatcher is, the better the response is. Obviously, one trend we see that we're trying to deal with, and we just dealt with it the other day, is a great dispatcher just became paramedic and took another job. So we're trying to avoid the stepping stone, and the board's been doing the best we can to manage costs with the savings that the Regional Dispatch Center has to try to reinvest that back into the employees. And really what part of this is about is trying to really encourage and grow a full career ladder. Just like both chiefs said, staffing is a big issue. It's very frustrating when you get someone in to train them for a couple years, they become familiar with the operation, familiar with the communities, and then all of a sudden, they're off in another place to become a police officer, firefighter, or whatnot. So we're hopeful that those retention bonuses will certainly help.
And I just want to also congratulate Gary and thank him for a job well done. We just renewed his contract the other day for 4 more years. And so, I think while we also want to maintain stability among the dispatch crew, our administrative team over there has been with us since the start. Both Gary and Dale have been over there. And I think like what a common theme you're hearing in public safety is morale. You're hearing these issues, and I think it's not just here, but it's certainly in all communities around the workload. And obviously, I think that probably spreads beyond public safety. I know you heard about it last night and the last couple of days of finance, but it is what it is. Obviously, all of you have read the narratives on this for years. And in FY25, you're going to see that number go up to about 1.4 million. So next year, you're going to see a jump of about 500,000. So just as context, because I know everybody loves my revenue charts for Monday, additional tax levy capacity of that 3.33 million we got this year, just a fair heads up to the entire audience, another 500,000 of that, probably a little less because we were wise as a community and put money away in the stabilization account. We were the only community in those 6 towns that created a savings account to take on that 100% number of FY25. And I can tell you the other communities of the other 5 that are in the district, are certainly nervous about what that means for them. That could mean huge layoffs in those communities. That could be major staff adjustments. I mean, that's very scary. When you look at that number coming up, to 1.4 million, that's a big jump. The last thing I would mention really quickly is Gary and the staff have already started to lay the groundwork for a couple of additional regionalization options. Taking on Mendon and Millville certainly helped the economies of scale. It's always been the goal of regionalization in any area, but we're looking at the possible expansion both within the MEC, and we are still looking at and keeping open eye on the other regional dispatch centers to see if there's other trends that we can do down the road. And so ultimately, we have to do those things. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of time on me. It's a lot of time on the other board members as town managers of those communities. It's a lot of time for them as well as the chiefs. These are just other things in our job descriptions, I think that, and I appreciate everybody listening for a few minutes and having Gary come in and with regional dispatch, but I just offer it out there as a lot of times we forget about these things, and I'm not looking, for any empathy. Don't worry about that, but on all those other town managers that serve on that board and all the chiefs who have an operations committee that they deal with, it's just more, it's just a lot more work that we all do that oftentimes I think goes unnoticed for the staff that are over there in Norfolk. So I know also one other quick thing is we're working on a power purchasing agreement to try to save funds in Norfolk by putting solar panels in a carport over on the regional dispatch center, which also happens to be the police station in Norfolk. So obviously all of us can answer any questions that folks may have.
No, go.
How does the calculation for our allocation of the MEC go?
So, excuse me, the assessments are dictated by the IMA. 50% of the assessment is based on population and 50% is based on 911 call volume.
Thank you.
I would assume we have the biggest volume based on the list of towns.
We have the largest, we basically almost combined our population and call volume are larger than the other 5
Franklin's
communities.
responsible for 44%.
And I assume, I didn't hear either chief complain, so I assume the service is good, reasonable anyway? They're nodding back. I was gonna ask about other opportunities. It would be nice to have, because I've been a junkie for years, listening. You can see the difference when you have to pick up the phone and call Bellingham, who's not in the district, for an ambulance, for instance, whereas the same dispatcher can send one from Rentham or Norfolk like that. You just notice that stuff.
Just to manage expectations, Mendon and Millville are tiny, tiny towns. I mean, we even joke at Millville, I think they have like 5 calls a week. That took 2 years. I mean, I just, it's the kind of light switch thing. We just think this stuff is all like Amazon 2-day Prime. And I think that's been a struggle with regionalization of dispatch. I mean, as we talked about publicly at the board meeting the other day,
you know, and truth be told, a lot of towns are struggling to hire dispatchers that are solo departments as well. There is no career ladder in these smaller towns like the Medfields, the Medways, the Millises, the Hollistons, the Bellinghams. You know, I mean, we've been working with State 911 to try to figure out if we can kind of, you know, do a little harder of a push, because to see those economies of scale, George, I mean, it would take us two to 3 years. So that assessment up there, you know, for 25, 26, you know, is still going to be probably at a full number until we can hopefully lay the groundwork on a larger program, which will obviously have some savings like we saw with Mendon and Millville. But negotiating with those communities, we have to redo the intermunicipal agreement. You know, we have to coordinate the fiber connections, you know, the software packages in those communities. We have to get grants through State 911. So there's a lot of coordination that goes into it, even from two small towns like Mendon and Millville. You know, it was a solid 2+ years. You know, to add in more towns, you know, you're still 2 or 3 years out. I mean, obviously we're committed to that, but, you know, I guess maybe I'm the skunk at the party where I just have to say, you know, hey, it's still going to take a few years to get there.
Okay. Don't see anything?
Thanks,
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
The inspection department.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Gus Brown, the head of the inspection department. Just want to walk you through a couple changes this year, fiscal year 2024. We're over last year's budget by that amount that you see there, but we're actually under. And the reason is it was the changes that we did with staffing the prior year, but as you can see from 2022, we're actually under by a couple $1,000s this year. And some of those changes are because we actually saved some money on our office expenses because we're online, and that's made a huge difference with what we order and what we need. Also, we've added that weights and measures position as well. But I think we're in pretty good fiscal shape, and I don't have too much more to add. Be a little bit shorter than some of the
That's perfect.
others, but
As long as he's not sending me a violation. I don't mind at all. He's never done it. Anybody?
I'm good on mine.
Oh, you're getting off easy tonight.
I guess, huh?
That's pretty darn good at what he does.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Animal control?
Well, the chief's going to remind me of a couple points on animal control, because I think a few years ago, a long time ago, the town administrator, Mr. Nutting, I think gave them control of some of the calls, but Tracy does.
Say you were dog.
Another genius move by Jeff Nutting. No, but in all seriousness, you know, just for the public's edification, you know, we're in a regional agreement with the town of Bellingham, and Mr. Nutting worked out, before Mr. Lynch and I were here, worked out a negotiation with them where the town of Bellingham manages all this, sends us a bill for the assessment. We house the facility here, we work on the capital program together, and I'm sure a last-minute consolation prize made the chief of police the dog officer in Franklin. Which, you know, again, just those little things we do on our weekends. In all seriousness, though, Tracy and Pat and the staff down there, I say this every year, I think, to you. Every other town I've worked for, on a monthly basis, the town manager's office gets complaints about dogs. You know, 7.5 years, kind of like the record that was broken tonight. Maybe I'll get a call tomorrow about a dog problem just to break the record, but almost 8 years in Franklin, I've never had one citizen ever complain about animal control. So they do a tremendous, tremendous job. And, you know, so that's it.
Yeah, he does Whose Dog Is This a lot on Facebook. So, I guess we're done, except
Final
whatever
rec?
you want to do.
Yeah, we'll just cut through some
Do you
slides.
want to do the vote on the overall budget at this point, or do you, because I don't have a total, I guess.
I give you the, yeah. I do.
Wanna get it?
Let me just, Yeah, why don't you do that? Because I was going to recommend that anyways, but I want to obviously have a couple slides up about potential options for the schools, as well as I know there's been a lot of questions regarding overrides and stuff, and so I'm just going to do a couple primers up there just to give some people some information and some direction. So, but the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, is even regardless of some of the additional changes in the budget, the recommendation I would make to all of you is, if you're comfortable with the budget as presented, to approve the budget as is. And as I'll go through in a few minutes, a slide on where the adjustments may take place, because I have to wait for state aid numbers to come in July, so I'll address those later.
She's going to play Glenn Jones.
Okay.
Okay, so I move for the Finance Committee to adopt said general fund budget, water enterprise fund budget, sewer enterprise fund budget, solid waste enterprise fund budget, and stormwater enterprise fund budget, with a total appropriation of $150,948,188, of which $134,277,223 is to be raised and appropriated in the balance transferred from enterprise fund revenues and retained earnings as described.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, George?
Yes.
Natalie?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
David? See mine. Dave?
He's just muted.
Dave, you're muted if you're talking.
Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. Stephanie, are you on? I see a phone number. I'm assuming that's you, Stephanie? Might not be her.
Guess not.
All right, we'll move on. John?
Yes.
Tyrell?
Yes.
Chana?
Yes.
And Nicole is yes.
So it's adopted unanimously, minus one vote.
Yes.
Right.
Yep, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I've kind of used a little bit of a builder term here, sharpening the pencils, kind of a double meaning, but obviously I think everyone's aware of the challenges after last night's meeting. You know, some very difficult numbers coming out for the schools. I just wanted to give some annual numbers here. Again, the slideshow the next couple of days will put last night's presentation from the schools as well as this up online, as well as Mondays. So I just want to give a historical public school dollar amount annual increase chart up here. And as you can see, back in 2016, the annual appropriation for the public school district was about $57 million. And this year we'll, over the course of those 7 or 8 fiscal years, get up to about 71.2 based on the recommendation of the Finance Committee. And you can see the annual increase over here in the middle column. And then over here, there's some percentages. Obviously, 2021 was the big pandemic year, so that year in there is going to have a lot of federal stimulus funds, both for the town as well as the school. But I just wanted to point out the average annual increase over this time period is 1.787 million, or approximately 55 to 60% of the tax levy. Okay, and I had to remind myself of this, and somehow it came out, and probably while I was sleeping in the middle of the night. In 2019, 2020, just to remind the public at home, as well as all of you, some of you were here, some of you weren't, the town tapped almost $2 million of its rainy day fund to balance the school budget in those 2 years. So even these numbers where the 3 million number is there, you know, only were those numbers up that high because of the stabilization account. And as we all know, the stabilization account went to zero, which is very dangerous. And now the stabilization account, we've been able to rebuild that back up over the last 3 or 4 years to 3 million. And that's a key thing. As we just heard from our town auditors on last week, as well as our bond rating agencies, which we did the unthinkable to get a AAA bond rating, there were 2 big factors. There was savings in rainy day supply of funds, and there was the Community Preservation Act, which essentially proves to rating agencies that the taxpayers are behind tax increases. So it shows a certain power in your community to be able to do those things. Maintaining the AAA bond rating, I don't think I need to tell any of you, but just for the folks watching at home, is probably one of the most critical policies we have to maintain for interest and mortgage rates going up and skyrocketing. If the town is ever going to borrow, that AAA bond rating must stay. And I think it was pretty clear on our auditor presentation last week, for those of you that may have watched. The auditor said, to an answer to a question from Councilor Pellegrini, I believe it was, how important is all that? And basically, he confirmed that the AAA bond rating is directly correlated with the rainy day funds. I've gotten a lot of questions on some of these issues, so I'm just putting up a couple of educational slides. So other school appropriations since that same time, we just went through the stabilization account. Almost $4.1 million in projected capital funding for vehicles, curriculum, technology, teacher and staff technology, facilities upgrades. The sources of those revenues were from free cash. As all of you know, where does free cash come from? It's always a trivia question, right? It's basically the folks behind me and here on Monday night from our town departments managing their budgets really well. And one of the things that I was really proud to hear from our auditors with an unsolicited question on it from, I think, again, Councilor Pellegrini was, how important is that? And he pointed to the reserves and really actually highlighted the fact that the town departments were managing their budgets so well. Is that was a really big feature in the fact that our audit came out with no management letter, with no recommendations, and that our books and everything have been transparent, clean, and organized. And so ultimately, that dynamic has really resulted in actually a streamlined set of funding, which has helped to offset the costs for the school district budget. I do expect in the future free cash will go down a little bit as budgets have been becoming a little bit more tight, but again, I think our departments will do a great job. To the point about borrowing authorizations, there are 2 that are pending. I've pointed this out before. This is also going to occupy an enormous amount of debt and interest capacity in our operating budget. I'm getting questions often, as they should be, quite frankly, from the schools about when can the high school 10-year upgrade take place. There's $1.5 million in authorization already there. And the Remington Jefferson remodel before the pandemic was scheduled to probably already be moving along right now. But obviously we got that delayed for a lot of different reasons, staff capacity, money, interest rates, et cetera. But in a couple of years, RJ will be 30 years old. And it needs a new roof. It's going to need new mechanicals. It's going to need a playground and a variety of other things. The good news is we already have a chunk of that money authorized. I'm sure that the estimate that we did back in 2020 has probably gone up. But I just put those on the radar because if we're going to maintain the quality of our facilities, particularly our school buildings, these are projects that really also need to get going at some point. And I just want to point out, the federal stimulus money has been a saver, but the schools have benefited. We gave almost 85% of the money from the CARES Act to the school district during the pandemic, mostly in the form of Chromebooks. Tim, unfortunately, was unable to make this year's hearing due to a personal conflict, but he will be in here next year because that was 4 years ago. And we all know Chromebooks don't last for 10 years. So now we're going to be asked for thousands and thousands of additional Chromebooks. These capital upgrades are huge amounts of money coming down the pike that are going to affect student education. We have to be cognizant of that. As we heard from Miriam and Lucas and everyone the other night, the ESSER money, the grant money, the ARPA money, the one-time funding, those dry up in the next 18 months. And so it's something to be cognizant about. Obviously, as folks know, we balanced, in the case of the town, the council and the town administrator and our departments and our unions held the line on the COLA increase at 2.5%, as we articulated the other night. But in order to get those contracts done, given the financial discrepancy between the unions, essentially we had to use ARPA funds, one-time revenues, to help settle those contracts. So while the tax levy impact is stable and we stayed within budget, okay, in order to get those contracts done and address the issues that the chiefs just made in terms of making sure that we pay our public safety personnel the amount that they deserve, we're up for collective bargaining up in 18 months. And in my book, that is not far away. It'll be here before we know it. I just need to make sure everyone's aware that we were able to get those contracts done with the infusion of ARPA funds, which will not be available in all likelihood in a couple of years. So my first recommendation, and again, as I just mentioned, we'll make these adjustments if town council feels that these are appropriate and the finance committee feels that these are appropriate. Later this summer, when we get the final state aid numbers, my recommendation would be to make some adjustments in the operating budget to transfer some money to get the schools back a little bit over that average annual increase. Okay, so the average annual increase again was about 1.78 million. If we do these items, we'd be able to get their annual increase from FY23 to FY24 up to 1.85 million. State aid, we estimate about 250,000. I think we heard from Tri-County, Natalie pointed out there's a difference there. But again, once all these numbers shake out, we'll get a final cherry sheet and we'll plug in those, and we will certainly dedicate the additional state aid to the school district, all again in advance of the start of the school year. That's the goal here, because obviously they need to know what kind of money they're dealing with before the school year starts for appropriate staffing. Second recommendation would be to take out the $116,000 for capital gear for police and fire. I did this because I've been asked to do this by many counselors and many others about we want to put capital funding in the operating budget. I think as we can all see, there's a lot of stress on the operating budget. And so I just think that at some point we have to come to that reality that we are just simply not going to have operating capacity given the competing demands. We have a capital program that works very, very well. This does not mean that our public safety officials are not going to get their turnout gear and tasers. They will. I'm just acknowledging the fact that I think for the benefit of the schools, we need to consider rolling back that money. But for illustrative purposes for everybody at home, I think it's important to notice, and I do agree with Councilor Pellegrini and Councilor Cormier-Ledger, we should have this stuff in the operating budget. We do use this stuff every year, and if we're going to get more officers and paramedics, we're going to need more. It is ridiculous that we're funding this stuff on the capital program, but it's the only way we've been able to do it for 20 plus years because of exactly the dynamics we talked about on Monday. As everybody knows, during the pandemic, a very easy way, it's not the best, but is to reduce the facilities budget $100,000, and in the spring of 2024, let's give Mother Nature a shot. She did it well when the pandemic year, the grass was okay, it was green, but reducing $100,000 for lawn watering, maybe someday we realize we just can live without irrigation on some fields, and we can just let the good old rain take care of it, but that'll save $100,000, which I know will go a far way for the district. Reducing $50,000 for snow and ice removal expenses, and then for regional dispatchers I mentioned a minute ago, being able to transfer and use and tap into that stabilization fund, which currently has about just under $900,000, and that account will allow us to do and to give a little bit more to the school district. So that basically is about an increase of about $820, and be able to plug that in, and we'll be able to get the school district over their average annual increase, which I know they greatly appreciate. And then recommendation 2, certainly we're open to any ideas and comments that the Finance Committee or any of the other officials have, but in absence of that, there are a few other things that we're working on. Number one, I will admit, as I mentioned on Monday, I whiffed completely with my analysis, political analysis, that the out-of-district placement was a layup for the legislature to fix. Disappointingly, the House did not put any relief in that in their House budget. The governor filed a supplemental budget, which is really annoying, because I was really hoping that she could have just put it in her budget proposal, which then would have relieved the idea of the House and Senate having to do it. That's $93 million to pay that 14% statewide. $93 million, which would infuse $775,000 in relief for the school district. I think we all know that would make a huge difference. The governor both filed a 10% relief, and there were amendments filed in the House for a 10% relief. Neither of them are moving forward. So we've left it up to the Senate. I've written them letters. I wrote another one today with another email. Just with $1 billion in taxes coming in from the billionaire's tax, I'll stop. Really frustrating. I don't get it, especially where that money goes. For out-of-district placement for special education students, it just seems like, how can they not find the $93 million to pay that bill for every district in the state that's frustrated by this. And we heard the superintendent talk very passionately about this last night, as they should. My heart's pumping. It's just like, come on, man.
We have paramedics in the back.
I'll take a scorpion. I'll take a scorpion ball on the ride too. Streamlined financial office and HR office restructures. I just want to give a huge shout out to both the superintendent and the assistant superintendent. We have had some incredible meetings the last couple weeks on trying to make some gains there. Importantly, not just to develop some savings for the school district, which will save them a little bit of money, building additional capacity. As we all mentioned, I appreciated your words last night, George, for Ms. Goodman. She's been a one-person show for a long time. She's working 60 to 65 hours a week. I consider her 2 full-time employees with her skill and knowledge. We need some additional capacity for both the town and the schools down here. It's been a very, very challenging couple of years. So, and then the mental health task force, talking to the superintendent again, I just want to give huge kudos to the superintendent in talking to us. They have a mental health task force at the schools. I've been trying to get them to think of the mental health issue as a community-wide issue, right? Not just a school issue, but a community-wide one. The schools don't create that crisis. They receive the symptoms of that crisis, and we have to look further beyond. The chief of police in particular has been extraordinarily innovative on this issue. There might be some additional ARPA funds available. The opioid settlement funds have still yet to be determined, and some additional shared services. Our senior center has a caseworker. We have some additional resources in the fire department and beyond. I think this might be able to provide some additional safety net resources either directly to the school district or at least maybe able to take some of that relief off their plate. These are just a few things that I'm mentioning that are in the works right now and that we're working on as a team. Both the schools and the town officials are working very collaboratively and very well together on a lot of these issues. And I just didn't want these issues to go unnoticed, that both of our operations are working very collaboratively on a lot of these. So moving forward, a few other items. Just moving forward, I think all of you on the Finance Committee, I'll just lob this one out there. We obviously heard from the school business administrator last night that they're going to be using a disproportionate amount of revolving funds to pay for their operations. After this year or moving forward into FY25, we just have to really draw the line somewhere. If we take all those, if we don't preserve the reserves that are left in either the school department or the town, we are really putting the community in a much, much more challenging position, especially with the global economics uncertain around a recession and stubborn inflation. Town administration and the school administration will be working to have weekly meetings to discuss the solutions to a lot of the financial pressures. I do want to offer and facilitate an educational meeting with the town attorney on the legal procedures around ballot questions, election details, ethics laws for public employees. We'll talk in a minute relative to an override. I just mentioned the restructure of the finance and HR departments, and just to really work together to develop a process to develop a sustainable and comprehensive community-wide financial roadmap for the future. I think Tyrell mentioned this last night, and I know the superintendent talking to him today. Just so everybody is aware, while there may be a little challenging meeting demands, that does not mean that our offices do not work well together. Our offices work extremely well together. The police chief, the fire chief, DPW director, all of us work and communicate to the best of our ability. I think as we've heard from everybody, all of us are overextended. We cannot possibly communicate at a level with Jedi mind tricks. We all have a phenomenal working process together. So before I get to the override information, I'm going to let the assistant superintendent in here so she can hear. Probably a tidbit she might be interested in. So, Override 101, step one. From a development of what you're asking for, it all starts with the school committee. Obviously, unless schools are not asking for any additional levy capacity, which is not the case here, the school committee begins the process. How does that happen? Ultimately, as Tyrell asked kind of last night, what do you need? What's the future plan? And what are you asking the taxpayers to raise their property taxes for? And ultimately, what needs to happen is the school committee needs to have a discussion, either a process, whatever they want to do, to determine what their needs are. And they need to essentially write a letter with a line item by line item request of what their financial future is. What's legally not required, which I think Tyrell brought up, which is a phenomenal point, which is, well, you may need additional capacity 1 year out or 2 years, but what's the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth year? That's not required for an override. That's not part of what you ask people for. But inevitably, people are going to ask those questions. You want to be prepared for that stuff, right? So the school committee needs to begin the process of an override, need a discussion of what they want and why, and they need to send a letter essentially to the town council, who is legally authorized under state law to put a ballot on the to put a question on the ballot. The reason why I mentioned up here 2014 is because in 2014 the town council themselves decided to put an override on the an override question on the ballot just for roads. So obviously that didn't require the school committee. I'm just trying to separate it out and make sure everybody understands. The second step would be the town council is the authorized body for the community that puts ballot questions of any kind on the ballot. And essentially the council would review the school request, and then there would be a discussion of non-education override items, possibly such as roads, sidewalks, capital municipal needs. Also police officers, paramedics, staffing, salaries. I mean, it could be anything, right? It could be for insurance. I mean, it could be any account that you all just went through, and they say, we need this amount of money. We need $100,000 for line item this. And essentially what goes out is a book with a line item by line item description for the voter of what it is that the town council has decided to put on a ballot question. Step 3, which is optional, it's not required by statute, but I'm guessing that most people would probably want to do this, is once you have a ballot initiative settled by the two bodies, would review at the joint budget subcommittee. Again, not required, but for educational purposes and maybe strategic purposes, if the council and school committee are asking for an amount of money, a joint budget subcommittee may be the proper place to try to find out what they think, as both all three main financial boards say, what do we think the appetite might be in the community? What's the average household cost? I mean, all these different dynamics, but at least you have members of the school committee, the council, and the finance committee all discussing this at once for potential ballot prep. Again, not required, probably a good idea. And then step 4, the town council would coordinate with the town clerk on an election schedule. Election schedules vary, but I've put up some basics up there where, it depends on whether it's a federal, state, or local election. Local election gives you a little more authority because it's your local election. But when you get into state and federal elections, you then have to go by the ballot requirements to put a question of any type, by the way. This isn't just an override, but any ballot question, you have to go through the rules, the Secretary of the Commonwealth or the federal government. So the minimum amount of days is 35 days at a local election. That you have to give a heads up to the taxpayers, minimum of 35 days. I put a link up here to a Prop 2.5 ballot questions manual. I'm going to hold it up and so all of you can see. I don't know if Chris, you may not want to. Oh, hey, nice job, man. It is from 2017. It's a Prop 2.5 ballot questions requirements and procedures. For anyone interested in getting involved in the override debate, this is must-read material. There is also what's called the infamous DOR Prop 2.5 primer, which is also a good reading. Combined documents, probably about 50, 60 pages. I highly encourage everyone to read that in the community that is interested in this issue. Depending on the date, if there was ever a question, additional requirements are triggered. So what does that mean? If for some reason a group or the council decided they wanted to have a ballot question before the budget hearings, before the legislative body, the town council, there's a different set of requirements. If a vote was after tonight or later in the year, maybe in the mid-year at a state election or local election in November, you essentially have to give two options. Here's the budget that's approved, budget A, and budget B. So this is, I think, why it's really, really critical that if a group of citizens are interested in this, that the offer stands to have an educational forum with myself, the finance team, but more importantly, the town attorney. I've got asked a couple times who drafts it. It'll be the town attorney. I can assure you the drafting of the ballot question is by far the easiest piece. It'll take 5 minutes. It's probably one or two sentences. But understanding the do's and don'ts, particularly for public paid officials, is critical. Which is the next point up here. The town administrator, superintendent of schools, as mentioned last night, paid staff cannot advocate for or against an override with town resources. Ultimately, we are significantly limited to this. And as I think you saw last night, there is a cautiousness around this issue. I think if there's ever an appetite from a community group to do this, needs to come forward and need to have a bit of an educational seminar for our employees, both the school and town employees. And really the town attorney really needs to be consulted and be advising all of us exactly what the do's and the don'ts are. As I mentioned last night to Nicole's question, I apologize, Nicole, it was a bit of a long answer. I didn't get to it right away, but ultimately this is a community-driven effort. The superintendent of schools and the town manager can do a couple things. We can talk about mechanics like tonight. We can discuss with our boards what the needs are, kind of through our department heads like discussed tonight. We can help shape some of that, but we cannot discuss strategy. We cannot discuss how much. We cannot discuss how to go out and strategize and when to do it. We cannot get into those things. That, unfortunately, for a lot of residents is going to be one of the largest pieces of learning curves here. Because grassroots organization in Franklin oftentimes struggles. And there's not a League of Women Voters or a defined group, if you will, that traditionally in a lot of communities kind of drives these things. And so it really is a bit of it's a traditional grassroots organization is required. And citizens have to come together on their own and have their own meetings on non-town property, wherever that is, to go out and coordinate this on their own. And I can assure all of you that is a very laborious process, that is very complicated, and it takes really a lot of extremely dedicated people to make phone calls, commitments from friends, find a place to meet, if it's a house or if there's a rental place people have to go to or whatever. The law was designed this way for a reason. When you are increasing property taxes or proposing that, that is easily one of the top 3 or 5 most difficult things to do in any municipality. Many town managers or superintendents might say it's the hardest thing to do. And under the law in Prop 2.5 back in 1980, they set out a bunch of standards and said if communities are going to raise property taxes, it has to be coming from citizen-driven initiatives, not from government officials. And I can't emphasize that enough. Legally, you also have to have a ballot question committee, which gets into OCPF requirements, which gets into having a committee with a treasurer who's taking in receipts and reporting to the Commonwealth about fundraising and lobbying, which gets into in-kind donations. I know eyes are glossing over already, which is why I only have one slide on it, but I'm speaking to this about the complexity around this. This is not some simple thing we go out and do a few tweets, a couple TikTok videos and rally the troops and go out and do it in a couple days. This has some serious consequences. I want to give a shout out to Mike Doherty, who's an attorney in town. I believe 6 or 7 years ago, pro bono, as Mike has always been an extraordinarily charitable individual in town, doing a lot of free work for a lot of causes. I believe he might have set up a committee at one point, but that's about all I know folks in the community are gonna have to reach out. Sorry, Mike, you might get a couple calls, but I know you care deeply about the community, and I know you'll respond to those as you see fit. People always ask me too, what's the override history? So we'll just go through it. Quick shout out to Nancy Danello, our town clerk, for getting a lot of these numbers together really quickly this week. Since 1990, Franklin has attempted 11 operational Prop 2.5 overrides. All but one in 2007 actually failed. And as we all know, the reason why I forget that is within 2008, with the recession, it wiped away all the progress. So you're lucky you had the override in 07, or the cuts would have been deeper. The last one was proposed in 2014, which is $1.5 million, which was dedicated just to roads and was defeated nearly 2-1. The last omnibus, by that I mean school and town override, which was majority school. The last school override attempt was in 2010. 2010. 13 years. All of you have been listening to this narrative from Jeff and myself for years. And there has never been an effort in 13 years, 13 years, to have an operational override for the school district. There has never been one piece of correspondence from anyone requesting an override for over a decade. To me, that is somewhat sobering. And that one in 2010 was also defeated nearly 2-1. Since 1990, we've had a lot of debt exclusions in town. 8 out of 11 of them have been approved. This is a pretty frequent and consistent statistic. When you need a school building, taxpayers generally step up at a very high rate. Operational overrides statewide have about a 20 to 25% success rate. So usually about a quarter of them pass. Most recently, by the way, the town of Hingham just passed an override for $7.5 million. Hingham. The most recent example of a discretionary tax increase, however, was the Community Preservation Act in 2020. For those out there that are looking for a little hope, 60-40. We all hoped. I don't think there was a lot of people that thought it would have been that overwhelming. But as I mentioned last night, there was a long-standing process in that of an educational piece from the town council for many, many years of defining the problem, educating people, one-on-ones, small coffees, talking to folks. And I think the piece that really hit home was, for all those that want to blame the pandemic for a lot of problems, at one of the most challenging times in everybody's life that year, the town council still on the football field, I think we were 20 feet apart, still voted to put it on the ballot, and look at the success. It shows you what good grassroots momentum can do, what education can do, and the amount of time it takes, I think, to do that. And just for illustration, a few of the future likely debt exclusions, as we heard last night, the Tri-County School, the police station, and I'm sure at some point a new school as well. That's it.
My eyes glazed.
Wait till the real conversation happens.
Anything else? Future agenda items?
Just one question on Heather.
Heather?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for, yes, can you hear me?
We
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, good, okay, great, thanks. Thank you for all of that information. I just have one clarifying, maybe just for me, I don't know, clarifying question, Mr. Helen, and that is, your slide says the school committee would recommend the override, but then you mentioned that no governing bodies can be a part of the process, and it needs to be a grassroots citizen campaign. So is the school committee not considered a government? I just want to understand that.
They are. Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So elected officials are not held to the same ethics laws as we are. So essentially, as a paid employee, we can't use town resources like buildings, letterhead. We can't use town staff to put out promotional flyers like vote yes on the override. Most notably, just for an example, we have a marketing and communications director, Lilia Rivera. Lily cannot do any promotional flyers, vote yes, vote no. And so we're restricted significantly under state law. People, and again, we'll go through this later on, I'm sure, at educational forums. Employees do have rights when they're off town time, okay? But the school committee and the town council are not held to the same conflict of interest because they're not being compensated. And so they can actually go out and still continue to advocate, and they're really the ones that are likely to lead a lot of this charge.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anything
That's all I
else? Just one note, we're gonna be losing 2 members. Dave Weish, who's on Zoom tonight, and Tyrell is moving off to beautiful Utah.
Ah, it is beautiful.
So, thank you for the service,
Thank you,
both of
Tyrell.
you.
Long drive.
Appreciate it. I think that's it, and do you have a next meeting? I would guess either something to do with the adjustments you talked about, or September.
I think it would be June if there was a need for one, and then we'll take the summer off unless, again, there's some other need. If there's not a need in June, I don't know if any of you will be upset missing another one, but, you know, but in all seriousness, like, I think, you know, I think you have a little bit of the roadmap here, and if there's need for a meeting, I know there's kind of some dates on the calendar, but we'll follow up with everybody. Otherwise, you know, we'll see everybody in September.
You may.
Just as a reminder to everybody listening, the topic of the override is of course out there, and I think a lot of the commentary is of course around the schools, but after hearing from everybody this week, I think even listening to the police chief and the fire chief, there is so much need everywhere, so I caution everybody to do it right. If you're gonna approach it, take your time, involve everybody, because it's not just a school issue, it's everywhere, so I just want to point that out because I think there's a lot of chatter out there, but it's everybody, and so I think it'll be great to see people come together, but just caution people to breathe. Jamie told me that earlier.
Yeah.
And just be inclusive of everybody and everybody's needs, because I said it last night. We don't want to be reactive when it's too late. I think some would argue it is too late, but we don't want it to become more severe. So just wanted to say my piece and keep that in mind. I'm good now.
Nicely said. Anybody else? Okay, motion to adjourn.
Second.
George,
Yes.
Natalie,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Tyrell,
Yes.
Chana,
Yes.
and Nicole is yes.
See you in September.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.